Grizzlies Forge of northern Minnesota, the show you've waited for. This is Grizzlies Growls, and I am honored to present our host, the man, the mystery, the legend. This is Grizzly.
Hello again. So, I am doing this really quick and dirty. I'm going to re-podcast Eugenics in its entirety, and I thought it was rather well done in the first place, so I'm not really going to change anything. And I'm going to put it on the Grizzlies Growls feed, because technically speaking, I'm still doing the Federalist Papers on the Hibernation feed. And please note that this is the version I originally did for podiabooks.com. It does mention Podiabooks frequently, but just remember that this is all going to be off of grizzliesgrowls.com. So enjoy something I did back in 2010. Eugenics and Other Evils, G.K. Chesterton. Episode 3. Eugenics and Other Evils by G.K. Chesterton. Read by David Grizzly Smith. Part 1. The False Theory. Chapter 3. The Anarchy from Above. A silent anarchy is eating our society. I must pause upon the expression, because the true nature of anarchy is mostly misapprehended. It is not in the least necessary that anarchy should be violent, nor is it necessary that it should come from below. A government may grow anarchic as much as a people. The more sentimental sort of Tory uses the word anarchy as a mere term of abuse for rebellion, but he misses a most important intellectual distinction. Rebellion may be wrong and disastrous, but even when rebellion is wrong, it is never anarchy. When it is not self-defense, it is usurpation. It aims at setting up a new rule in the place of the old rule. And while it cannot be anarchic in essence because it has an aim, it certainly cannot be anarchic in method, for men must be organized when they fight. And the discipline in a rebel army has to be as good as the discipline in the Royal Army. This deep principle of distinction must be clearly kept in mind. Take, for the sake of symbolism, those two great spiritual stories which, whether we count them as myths or mysteries, have so long been the two hinges of all European morals. The Christian, who is inclined to sympathize generally with the constituted authority, will think of rebellion under the image of Satan, the rebel against God. But Satan, though a traitor, was not an anarchist. He claimed the crown of the cosmos, and had he prevailed, he would have expected his rebel angels to give up rebelling. On the other hand, the Christian whose sympathies are more generally with just self-defense among the oppressed will think rather of Christ himself defying the high priest and scourging the rich traders. But whether or no Christ was, as some say, a socialist, he was most certainly not an anarchist. Christ, like Satan, claimed the throne. He set up a new authority against an old authority, but he set it up with positive commandments and a comprehensible scheme. In this light, all medieval people, indeed all people until a little while ago, would have judged questions involving revolt. John Ball would have offered to pull down the government because it was a bad government, not because it was a government. Richard II would have blamed Bolingbroke not as a disturber of the peace, but as a usurper. Anarchy, then, in the useful sense of the word, is a thing utterly distinct from any rebellion, right or wrong. It is not necessarily angry. It is not, in its first stages at least, even necessarily painful. And, as I said before, it is often entirely silent. Anarchy is that condition of mind or methods in which you cannot stop yourself. It is the loss of that self-control which can return to the normal. It is not anarchy because men are permitted to begin uproar, extravagance, experiment, peril. It is anarchy when people cannot end these things. It is not anarchy in the home if the whole family sits up all night on New Year's Eve. It is anarchy in the home if members of the family sit up later and later for months afterwards. It was not anarchy in the Roman villa when, during the Saturnalia, the slaves turned masters or the masters slaves. It was, from the slave owner's point of view, anarchy if, after the Saturnalia, the slaves continued to behave in a Saturnalian manner. But it is historically evident that they did not. It is not anarchy to have a picnic, but it is anarchy to lose all memory of meal times. It would, I think, be anarchy if, as is the disgusting suggestion of some, we all took what we liked off the sideboard. That is the way swine would eat, if swine had sideboards. They have no immovable feasts. They are uncommonly progressive, our swine. It is this inability to return within rational limits after a legitimate extravagance that is the really dangerous disorder. The modern world is like Niagara. It is magnificent, but it is not strong. It is as weak as water, like Niagara. The objection to a cataract is not that it is deafening or dangerous or even destructive. It is that it cannot stop. Now, it is plain that this sort of chaos can possess the powers that rule a society as easily as the society so ruled. And in modern England, it is the powers that rule who are chiefly possessed by it, who are truly possessed by devils. The phrase, in its sound old psychological sense, is not too strong. The state has suddenly and quietly gone mad. It is talking nonsense, and it can't stop. Now, it is perfectly plain that the government ought to have, and must have, the same sort of right to use exceptional methods occasionally that the private householder has to have a picnic or sit up all night on New Year's Eve. The state, like the householder, is sane if it can treat such exceptions as exceptions. Such desperate remedies may not even be right, but such remedies are endurable as long as they are admittedly desperate. Such cases, of course, are the communism of food in a besieged city, the official disavowal of an arrested spy, the subjection of a patch of civil life to martial law, the cutting of communication in a plague, or that deepest degradation of the Commonwealth, the use of national soldiers, not against foreign soldiers, but against their own brethren in revolt. Of these exceptions, some are right, and some wrong, but all are right insofar as they are taken as exceptions. The modern world is insane, not so much because it admits the abnormal, as because it cannot recover the normal. We see this in the vague extension of punishments like imprisonment. Often the very reformers who admit that prison is bad for people propose to reform them by a little more of it. We see it in panic legislation like that after the white slave scare, when the torture of flogging was revived for all sorts of ill-defined and vague and variegated types of men. Our fathers were never so mad, even when they were torturers. They stretched the man out on the rack. They did not stretch the rack out, as we are doing. When men went witch-burning, they may have seen witches everywhere because their minds were fixed on witchcraft, but they did not see things to burn everywhere because their minds were unfixed. While tying some very unpopular witch to the stake, with the firm conviction that she was a spiritual tyranny and pestilence, they did not say to each other, "A little burning is what my Aunt Susan wants, the cure of backbiting." Or, "Some of these faggots would do your cousin James good, teach him to play with a poor girl's affections." Now, the name of all this is anarchy. It not only does not know what it wants, it does not even know what it hates. It multiplies excessively in the more American sort of English newspapers. When this sort of New Englander burns a witch, the whole prairie catches fire. These people have not the decision and detachment of the doctrinal ages. They cannot do a monstrous action and still see it as monstrous. Wherever they make a stride, they make a rut. They cannot stop their own thoughts, though their thoughts are pouring into the pit. A final instance, which can be sketched much more briefly, can be found in this general fact, that the definition of almost every crime has become more and more indefinite, and spreads like a flattening and thinning cloud over larger and larger landscapes. Cruelty to children, one would have thought, was a thing about as unmistakable, unusual, and appalling as parricide. In its application, it has come to cover almost every negligence that can occur in a needy household. The only distinction is, of course, that these negligences are punished in the poor, who generally can't help them, and not in the rich, who generally can. But that is not the point I'm arguing just now. The point here is that a crime we all instinctively connect with Herod on the bloody night of innocence has come precious near being attributable to Mary and Joseph when they lost their child in the temple. In the light of a fairly recent case, the confessedly kind mother who was lately jailed because her confessedly healthy children had no water to wash in, no one, I think, will call this an illegitimate literary exaggeration. Now, this is exactly as if all the horror and heavy punishment attached in the simplest tribes to parricide could now be used against any son who had done any act that could colorably be supposed to have worried his father and so affected his health. Few of us would be safe. Another case out of hundreds is the loose extension of the idea of libel. Libel cases bear no more trace of the old and just anger against the man who bore false witness against his neighbor than cruelty cases do of the old and just horror of the parents that hated their own flesh. A libel case has become one of the sports of the less athletic rich, a variation on baccarat, a game of chance. A music hall actress got damages for a song that was called vulgar, which is as if I could fine or imprison my neighbor for calling my handwriting rococo. A politician got huge damages because he was said to have spoken to children about tariff reform. As if that seductive topic would corrupt their virtue like an indecent story. Sometimes libel is defined as anything calculated to hurt a man in his business, in which case any new tradesman calling himself a grocer slanders the grocer opposite. All this, I say, is anarchy, for it is clear its exponents possess no power of distinction or sense of proportion by which they can draw the line between calling a woman a popular singer and calling her a bad lot, or between charging a man with leading infants to protection and leading them to sin and shame. But the vital point to which to return is this, that it is not necessarily, or even specially, an anarchy in the populace. It is an anarchy in the organ of government. It is the magistrates, voices of the governing class, who cannot distinguish between cruelty and carelessness. It is the judges and their very submissive special juries who cannot see the difference between opinion and slander. And it is the highly placed and highly paid experts who have brought in the first eugenic law, the feeble-minded bill, thus showing that they can see no difference between a mad and a sane man. That, to begin with, is the historic atmosphere in which this thing was born. It is a peculiar atmosphere, and luckily not likely to last. Real progress bears the same relation to it that a happy girl laughing bears to an hysterical girl who cannot stop laughing. But I have described this atmosphere first because it is the only atmosphere in which such a thing as the eugenist legislation could be proposed among men. All other ages would have called it to some kind of logical account, however academic or narrow. The lowest sophists in the Greek schools would remember enough of Socrates to force the eugenist to tell him, at least, whether Midias was segregated because he was curable or because he was incurable. The meanest Thomist of the medieval monasteries would have the sense to see that you cannot discuss a madman when you have not discussed a man. The most owlish Calvinist commentator in the 17th century would ask the eugenist to reconcile such Bible texts as derided fools with the other Bible texts that praised them. The dullest shopkeeper in Paris in 1790 would have asked what were the rights of man if they did not include the rights of the lover, the husband, the father. It is only in our own London particular, as Mr. Guppy said of the fog, that small figures can loom so large in the vapor, and even mingle with quite different figures, and have the appearance of a mob. But above all, I have dwelt on the telescopic quality in these twilight avenues, because unless the reader realizes how elastic and unlimited they are, he simply will not believe in the abominations we have to combat. One of those wise old fairy tales that come from nowhere and flourish everywhere tells how a man came to own a small magic machine like a coffee mill, which would grind anything he wanted when he said one word and stop when he said another. After performing marvels, which I wish my conscience would let me put into this book for padding, the mill was merely asked to grind a few grains of salt at an officer's mess on board ship, for salt is the type everywhere of a small luxury and exaggeration, and sailors' tales should be taken with a grain of it. The man remembered the word that started the salt mill, and then, touching the word that stopped it, suddenly remembered that he forgot. The tall ship sank, laden and sparkling to the topmasts with salt like Arctic snows, but the mad mill was still grinding at the ocean bottom, where all the men lay drowned. And that, so says the fairy tale, is why the great waters about our world have a bitter taste. For the fairy tales knew what modern mystics don't, that one should not let loose either the supernatural or the natural. Thank you for listening to Eugenics and Other Evils by G.K. Chesterton, read by me, David Grizzly Smith. Theme music for the book is Showdown by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. This book is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 3.0 license. That means please make copies, please share this book, but don't change it, don't sell it, and do tell people where you got it. If you like this book, leave a comment and a rating on podiobooks.com, or comment on grizzliesgrowls.com, or anywhere else you can. Blog about it, podcast about it, tweet about it. Tell everyone. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Grizzly's Growls, the life and times of a minor local celebrity. If you like the show, tell your friends. If you don't like the show, tell your enemies. If this podcast lasts more than 4 hours, see your doctor. Theme music is Hot Swing from Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or at feeds.feedburner.com/grizzliesgrowls. Comment at grizzly.libsyn.com or by voicemail at the comment line 218-234-CALL. That's 218-234-2255. These shows are released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 3.0 license. Your mileage may vary.